Will Donald Trump's return to the White House mean reorientation in the bilateral ties between India and US, particularly on the energy front? What does the appointment of Chris Wright mean? This and more in the latest episode of Energonomics. During the period between Donald Trump's first stint and now, a lot has happened regarding India's position in the global energy space. According to data available, hydrocarbon trade between the two countries has nearly doubled from 2018-19, touching $13.6 billion during 2023-24. For the first 2 months of financial year 2024-25, hydrocarbon trade is valued at $2.43 billion. America is among the top 5 fossil fuel suppliers to India, a reason why New Delhi cannot be ignored by the Trump regime. Trump's energy agenda is expected to emphasize on energy independence, economic growth, and expanded production of fossil fuel. The US-India Energy Cooperation is technical, bilateral, and economic. In November 2009, the two countries launched the Partnership to Advance Clean Energy, that is PACE, to accelerate inclusive, low-carbon growth by supporting research and deployment of clean energy technologies. In 2021, the two revamped the US-India Strategic Clean Energy Partnership, SCEP, to advance clean energy goals of both countries following the US-India Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership announced by President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Under the SCP, the two countries agreed to collaborate across 5 pillars: power and energy efficiency, renewable energy, responsible oil and gas, sustainable growth, emerging fuels. In addition, the two were to continue to do advanced innovation in civil nuclear power as a net zero solution through different collaborative programs, including the long-standing Civil Nuclear Energy Working Group. The two countries were also to engage the private sector and other stakeholders across the technical areas to help deploy clean technologies to accelerate a clean energy transition. To understand how US-India energy trade will shape out going forward, I spoke to Peter Jaka-Seller, an energy expert in India-US trade. I asked Peter if he sees any shift in Trump's energy policy in his current regime vis-a-vis the previous one, and how does he read the appointment of Chris Wright? And this is what he had to say.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be talking to you about the effects of the election. I expect climate policy and climate and energy policy in the US to be very similar in the second Trump administration as it was in the first. And, I think the reasons that we can be confident is that's what he campaigned on. He campaigned on expanding fossil fuels and deprioritizing climate policy. And that was definitely his orientation in the first term. I'm happy to expand on some of the policy areas that would play out in, but that's definitely the top line effect. And I think that the appointment of Chris Wright really is in line with this. He was a supporter of the Trump campaign, donated to the Trump campaign, and comes from the oil industry. And so he would be a very natural person to pursue the type of energy and climate policy that Trump is going to pursue. I'll also just mention that the picks for the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of the Interior, which are probably the two other most important posts in the US government for the energy portfolio, are very similar to Chris Wright and the type of person that Trump is putting in place.
A conversation also had to happen on the American stance on Russian oil in Trump's regime. I asked Peter, how does he see that? And this is what he had to say.
Yeah, I think we have to admit that on this question there's a lot of uncertainty. And that's because I think the policy approach to Russian oil will depend on the administration's larger Russia policy and its approach to the Russia-Ukraine war, which is the single biggest issue in the U.S.-Russia bilateral relationship. If Trump does strike a deal to end the war, I would expect that deal to also include sanctions relief, which I would in turn expect to include lifting sanctions on Russian oil. But as I said, I think it seems most likely that at some point these sanctions will be lifted if Trump does move to end the war. And likely end the war at the expense of Ukraine's goals and territorial integrity.
How does he see the India-US relations panning out in current regime of Trump? And this is what Peter's thoughts were.
I think that when we're thinking about the energy relationship, brought in particular between India and the US, energy will probably be a somewhat lower priority for the Trump administration than it was for the Biden administration. It will still be an issue that's discussed, but I think that for Democratic administrations where climate policy is a really high priority, that pushes climate and energy to the top of the bilateral agenda. I think the last point about the U.S.-India climate and energy relationship that I'll just make is that it's going to be also very linked to trade policy. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what US trade policy will look like. Trump has campaigned on high across the board tariffs on all goods imported into the United States.
Talking about trade and energy, one does need to focus on FTA and the status of nuclear between the two countries. I asked Peter what were his thoughts on them, and this is what he had to say.
I will admit that I do not think it's particularly likely that we're going to see an FTA between the US and India. I think that trade is a pretty difficult issue in both countries. I think historically trade FTAs with significant tariff reductions have been hard sell in India, and then especially in the last 10 or 15 years in the US and definitely under Trump, he is not eager to create new FTAs. And so I think that probably on both sides there'll be quite a bit of hesitancy to make a really comprehensive, meaningful trade deal. In terms of the US, nuclear energy is probably the most bipartisan area of agreement in the whole energy space. It's something that both political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, both support. And for a long time, there's been a lot of interest in American companies like Westinghouse building nuclear plants in India. Prime Minister Modi definitely wants to grow nuclear power generation in India, and so I think there's a lot of potential there. I think it's something that the Trump administration will move forward with as they did 4 years ago. I think on the Indian side, there's also appetite for it. I think it's interesting, though, that despite kind of how natural an area of cooperation it is, we've seen very slow progress on these nuclear power plants actually getting built. I think there are kind of regulatory reasons for that. I think that there are cost and just sort of basic economic reasons for that. And I think that those hurdles will continue. And so I think it's quite possible that we could come to the end of the Trump administration in 4 years, and those nuclear plants still wouldn't have been built despite the promise of nuclear as a area for the countries to work together.
My detailed conversation with Peter are given in the link below. Trump is known to be unpredictable, but one thing is certain, his tilt towards fossil fuel industry. Though he may not fully undo what Joe Biden had done and tread cautiously as far as the clean energy industry is concerned, he definitely cannot ignore India because of its sheer market size. This is all we had in the latest episode of Energonomics. Thank you.